To start this talk off, since it's the theme of the conference, I want us all to imagine. First, I want you to imagine being born. I want you to imagine entering the world for the first time, what it feels like to just start learning about all the things around you. How do you feel? What colors do you see? What surrounds you? Now I want you to imagine being 1 year old. I want you to imagine laying in your crib in your nursery looking up at the ceiling. What colors surround you? What does your nursery look like? What are you wearing? Now I want you to imagine being 6 years old. You're at a child's birthday party, other kids there around the same age as you. What are you wearing? What are the other kids wearing? What are you playing with? How are you interacting with one another? Now I want us to reflect. Imagining being born is hard because you're fresh to the world. You're not really you yet, right? But as we go on, the scenes become easier to imagine. So I'm going to ask you some questions about those scenes. So think back to the scene when you were 1 in your nursery. How many boys imagined a blue nursery? How many girls imagined a pink nursery? How many boys imagined a blue blanket? How many girls imagined a pink blanket? How many girls imagined a pink onesie? How many boys imagined a blue onesie? Now I want you to think back to the scene of being 6. How many girls imagined themselves wearing a party dress? How many boys imagine themselves wearing shorts and a top or pants? How many girls imagine themselves playing with dolls or playing house? How many boys imagine themselves playing with trucks or running around doing something physical? How many girls imagine themselves with long hair? How many boys imagine themselves with short hair? So all of the things that I just mentioned are expressions of gender. The way we wear our hair, the clothes we wear, the colors we associate ourselves with, the toys we choose, right? These are all gender expressions. We all have a biological sex. Those are our body parts. But gender, that's stuff that we do, right? That's stuff that we express. And I specifically juxtapose this with the birth scene to drive home one point. Gender was not born on us. It was placed on us, right? So gender is something that's not in us, but on us. And I want you to keep thinking about that as we move forward. The fact that gender expressions exist is not a problem in and of itself. But what is a problem is that we forget about that birth scene. We forget that gender is a decision that someone made for us before we could buy our own clothes, before we could choose our own toys, certainly before we could paint a nursery. So gender is something that's an expression that we start enacting before we even know that we're enacting it. And this becomes a problem over time because we forget that this wasn't something that we were born wanting to do, but rather something that someone decided for us, and we continue to enact because we're encouraged by society to continue to enact those behaviors. And those enacted behaviors that we're encouraged to continue, we use then as data to say, oh, well, look, everybody must want to do this, right? It must be natural. It's something that's born in us because otherwise, why would everyone go along with it, right? The research on gender as a learned behavior is actually very strong. Social learning theory is a theory that allows us to understand how children learn gender from important individuals in their lives, specifically parents or other guardians. Kids are like sponges. They're always watching to get indicators of whether or not they're being a good little girl or a good little boy. So even very minor things like a tiny smile or a small frown can tell a child whether or not they're enacting a behavior that you find appropriate given their biological sex. Now imagine the impact of more overt things that we hear all the time, like, you look so silly in that tutu to a little boy, or you look so beautiful in that party dress to a little girl. Interestingly, the extent to which parents adhere to gender norms actually predicts the extent to which children adhere to those gender norms and the extent to which they hold others accountable for those gender norms as well. This kind of variability in the extent to which children adhere to gender norms as a function of the extent to which their parents adhere to those same gender norms shows us that this is not something that's biological, but rather something that's nurtured or learned. So what? So who cares? Girls wear certain kinds of clothes, boys wear certain kinds of clothes, they play with certain kinds of trucks or dolls or whatever the case may be. It doesn't matter, it's not hurting anyone. I strongly disagree, and I'm going to tell you why. First, I want all of you to think about whether or not the behaviors that you enact are enacted because they were encouraged or because they were chosen. So we imagined a while ago. I want you to imagine again, past the ages that we talked about. So now imagine how you were enacting gender at age 12. and what that looked like, and how you were grooming yourself, and how you were dressing yourself, how you were interacting with people of the opposite sex, right? I want you to think about it at 18, how you were starting to enact your gender. I want you to think about it right now. And I want you to think about today, how many of your behaviors were chosen by you, the way you dress, the way you present yourself, the way you talk, the activities you take part in, how many were chosen by you out of a full array of options of expression, critically chosen because you actually liked them the best, and how many were and continue to be enacted because they're encouraged and expected by society? It's an impossible question to answer, and I'm asking it anyway. But it's an impossible question to answer because we've come so far in our gender journeys, and gender is so ingrained in our society that we actually can't imagine who we would be or what we would be like without those expectations, and that's kind of scary. So now I want you to imagine something else. I want you to imagine that instead of wishing to enact the gendered behaviors that were expected of you because of your biological sex, you liked something different. I want you to imagine that you preferred expressing your gender in the way that was expected of someone of your opposite biological sex. Or maybe you liked expressing it in both ways that were expected of both biological sexes. What happens then? What should happen then? What should happen to someone who makes a different choice about their gender? Well, let me tell you what does happen. I'm going to stick with the United States right now because laws vary widely by country, statistics vary widely by country. Some countries even allow for a third gender category that people can identify with. So I'm going to stick with the US. So more specifically, what happens when you make a different or unexpected choice about gender within a US context? Transgender individuals or gender nonconforming individuals make up anywhere from 0.1 to 1.1% of our population, given our best estimates. These estimates are likely low because a lot of transgender individuals are closeted about their transgender status. So that equates to about 700,000 transgender individuals in America today. Amongst those 700,000 transgender individuals in a large nationally representative study, it was found that 50% of them reported severe and ongoing harassment because of their gender identity. 25% of them reported being severely physically assaulted because of their gender identity. 1 in 5 reported being homeless at some point because their parents and all of their friends rejected them. This mixture of rejection and harassment from society sometimes drives transgender individuals to self-harm. 41% of transgender individuals in the United States report having attempted suicide at some point. That's compared to 20% in the lesbian, gay, and bisexual community, and 4.5% in the general population overall. Transgender murders, violence enacted against transgender individuals, are on the rise. As more individuals become comfortable with displaying their authentic gender identity, more of them are getting killed as a result. We just had a horrible transgender murder here in Philadelphia the other day. So if attitudes are our strongest predictors of behaviors, and we want to understand what our attitudes are about transgender individuals, and we use these behaviors towards transgender individuals to understand that, I would say we have a really long way to go in changing our attitudes towards transgender individuals in society, in changing our attitudes towards people who decide to wear makeup or not, or a dress-shaped piece of cloth versus a pant-shaped piece of cloth, or to have long hair versus short hair, right? We have a really long way to go. So what the heck am I doing here talking about this? I'm not transgender. I'm not even gender nonconforming. I express my gender in pretty much the way that I was expected to express it, so why am I here? I've always been fascinated by the ways in which gender affects our life decisions, whether it's our career trajectories, our decisions about family, our decisions about how to present ourselves, our decisions about how to interact with others, and our decisions about the way that we treat one another. And I'm just going to focus on that last piece, the way we treat one another. So every year I go to a transgender health conference in Philadelphia. It's called the Trans Health Conference. It's a large, diverse conference that draws transgender and non-gender conforming individuals from all over the country to learn about the pressing issues that face the transgender community today. I go there for the same reason, but I also go to conduct rigorous scientific studies to help provide data to create some solutions for these problems. Every year when I'm there, I'm amazed by the resilience of the people that I meet. I meet physicists, chemists, Wall Street traders, medical doctors, lawyers, and just generally nice people, right? And all of these people are there because they're intelligent, they're friendly, and they're willing to create change because all of them have faced some sort of hurdle in making these decisions about their gender identity. They all have stories, every single one. I've never met one that doesn't have a story. And so, when I'm talking to these individuals, they're telling me their stories. A lot of them are telling me that they wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for the fact that someone said, even though you're transgender, I still love you. And although I appreciate that sentiment, and it seems to have helped a lot of people, saying, even though you're transgender, I still love you, makes me wonder if this is the best we can do. So let me tell you about a man that I talked to, transgender man, I talked to recently, and he revealed to me that he had attempted suicide as a teenager because he was feeling so wrong about being different. And in the aftermath of that situation, his mother said to him, I would much rather you be transgender and alive than gender nonconforming and dead. And while I appreciate that sentiment, and while it helped that young man, and he talked very highly of the support of his family in that situation, I have to wonder if this articulate, intelligent man that I spoke to, if the best that we can do, if the best that he could report to me had happened to him in terms of inclusivity is saying, it's just a little bit better to me for you to be transgender than for you to be dead altogether, is that the best we can do? And I hear this kind of story all the time, which is why I use that example. I was moderating a panel here at Villanova a little while ago, and it was on LGBT inclusivity on campus and also in the community. And the first question that I asked the panel was, have you ever faced any prejudice in the community based on your LGBT status? And one young woman spoke up. She said, no, I've never faced any prejudice. Everything's good. It's all good. Okay, that's good. I was happy. Conversation ensues, and she reveals in other bits and pieces of the conversation, well, you know, I can't really display my gender identity in the way that I would if I wasn't here or I wasn't in this community, meaning the broader community, not just Villanova. I can't really express my sexuality the way I would otherwise. I can't really talk about my LGBT identity with certain people. I don't talk about it in front of certain faculty, right? So as she kept talking, I asked her if she wanted to reconsider her initial answer, that she had never experienced prejudice on campus and in the community. And so she kind of took a long pause. And she said, well, I guess the reason that I initially answered that way was because I've gotten so used to the idea that if people just tolerate me, I guess I don't expect that people are going to accept me anymore. If they tolerate me, that's the best I'll probably get from most people. And I had to ask myself this same question over these years of compiling this question in my mind of, is that the best we can do? Is the best we can do for this student who had a 4.0, she's in a career now where she's helping people every single day, was the best that we could do for that student tolerating her? For her, that was the best that we did. I bring students with me every year to the Trans Health Conference, and before we go to the conference, they have lots of questions, which is great. They want to know what they're going to encounter, who they're going to meet, what things are going to be like. And it's really interesting because most of them have never had any contact with any transgender individuals before. Contact is one of the biggest predictors of acceptance, true acceptance. People that have the highest levels of prejudice actually have the lowest levels of contact with people from that population. So it's really interesting for me to see this switch that happens in my students where they get to the conference and they start meeting these people and they're like, Dr. Sawyer, these people are so awesome. These people are so nice. These people are so cool. It's so sad that they're facing all of these inequities. And boom, and that moment, they're all right there with me. It takes one day of meeting people in this community for them to say, am I doing my best? Am I encouraging other people to do their best? What can we do to do our best? Now, I know that a lot of this sounds really bleak. Probably most of you don't want anyone to die or be depressed or even be sad sometimes because they feel left out because of their gender identity. But this is what is happening. And it will continue to happen unless we imagine something better, unless we imagine something different. Particularly in a country where we express life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, I urge you all to imagine a new kind of America where people have the liberty to pursue their gender expression in whatever way they see fit without having to compromise their happiness in the process. As a parallel example, 2% of the population identifies as redhead, naturally identifies as redhead. That's similar to the statistics I gave about transgender individuals in the population earlier. Ignoring that transgender individuals exist is as silly as telling all the redheaded babies that they have to dye their hair a different color for the rest of their lives. We embrace variability in other areas. Why do we suppress it here? We expect that people are going to fit into these very rigid categories, and we don't allow for any movement in between or areas in between or gray areas or ambiguity, right? We allow for it in other areas. We don't allow for it here. And I want to know why. So if this fires you up like it fires me up, what can you do about it? So first and foremost, I urge all of you to be courageous. Colleagues of mine at Northeastern University, Christian Thorogood, and Jenica Webster at Marquette University, we've been conducting some studies on the impact of courageous behaviors of others on transgender individuals in the workplace. And what we found so far is that even witnessing one courageous act towards transgender inclusivity increases transgender employees' job satisfaction, decreases their emotional exhaustion, and increases their willingness to be their authentic selves. But what does a courageous act look like? Let me give you an example. So we had a transgender woman that shared this story with us, and I thought it was pretty remarkable. So she decided to start displaying female identity in the workplace. She picked a really bad week to start doing that. She had forgotten that it was the annual black tie holiday gala that weekend. So she was going to have to wear a fancy dress. She started to get really nervous. She didn't want to go. She wasn't sure she was going to be able to make it. She decided to go anyway. She went in the dress, feeling a little uncomfortable. No one said or did anything overtly discriminatory to her. But when everybody got out on the dance floor, things started to feel a little bit more uncomfortable. So everybody was kind of dancing over here. People were kind of staying away from her. She was kind of dancing over here. She started to feel a little panicked, a little upset. Maybe I shouldn't have gone, right? And suddenly, as she's standing there wondering what she's doing there, if she should still be there, someone put their hand out to her, and it was the janitor. He put his hand out to her, he took her out on the dance floor, and they started dancing. She said suddenly she felt relieved. And I bring this up because that act was simple, and it was small, but it was kind. And it made a very big difference to someone who was suffering and feeling alone. And I want you all to think about ways in which you might enact similar, simple but kind behaviors to people who express their gender differently than you, or in a broad range of ways, right? People make choices about gender expression. Some will be the same as yours, some will not, and that is perfectly okay. But I want us to imagine a future where all of our children grow up in a place where they know that they will be loved and supported regardless of the way that they choose to express their gender. I want us to imagine a future where all of us are free to express ourselves in ways that we might not have imagined before, but maybe we can reimagine now. So gender is an expression that takes many forms, but so is love. I encourage all of you to embrace both of these forms of expression fully and fearlessly. Thank you.